Hi, Nima. How you doing? Well, I think everybody's got some questions about crypto versus MMT at this point because we've kind of come from an idea that okay, taxes is what gives money value. That's what we've been saying the last three episodes. And if taxes are what give money value, which is theft from the state is what gives money value, are we just doomed to require the state beating us over the heads in order to give this money value if we want to live in modern civilization? Is there no way that the in quotes private sector, and I put it in quotes because I'm separating it from the money creation power using taxation versus the money using power, which is the private sector. Can the private sector ever solve its way out of this if taxes are what's required to give money value? You were the first person to make the case. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I just repeated what you said. It's you. So, can I interrupt you real quick? I've had this confusion before, and I think I specifically had this confusion with Bob Murphy, the Austrian economist. That when I said miners, I think he was thought. I think he thought I was referring to mining the Bitcoin. Whereas we know that the miners, yes, they are mining the Bitcoin, but they are also the people facilitating the transactions. And when you're referring to the miners, you're for the sake of this conversation, we're more interested in the aspect that they're facilitating the transactions, less that they're actually mining and creating the coin, right? And then what you're saying is that these miners, who are the ones facilitating the transactions, the only way that you can get them to facilitate a transaction is by paying them in Bitcoin. So it has a similar current as taxation and government money, where if you have the federal government, which issues dollars by spending them and then taxes them out of existence, and this creates the full loop, which I guess essentially sends the money back to the original issuer. You got the same thing with the miners, where they're the ones injecting the money into existence in the first place and then demanding it back in order to facilitate Bitcoin transactions. Does that sound about right? So now here's my little bit of contention, and I know I brought this up to you before, and you just mentioned it a little bit. What exactly is the value of the blockchain. More than I imagined. Man, had I imagined, I'd be so rich. I stumbled across Bitcoin in 2011 and I was like, this is weird. Forget it. um, lucky bastard. Or I guess, uh, what's the word I want? Prescient bastard. Prescient. Am I pronouncing that right? Anyway, so when because I still want to keep poking that idea that I see where what you're saying is potentially valuable, where we can utilize this blockchain to get some permanent and indestructible information. Unalterable. All of that, all of that. Um, but I don't really see it being used for anything. And the reason I say that is I want to proofofexistence.com. I was not aware that Bitcoin was doing that. Okay, this is interesting. This is interesting. I thought Ethereum was doing that. I didn't realize that Bitcoin was doing that. Okay, well, so I want to I want two things to come out of my mouth at once. I'm going to go in this direction. Okay. So when we start looking at other cryptocurrencies, and one of the ones that stuck out to me the most when I was sniffing around these different cryptocurrencies was Steam, because of all the cryptocurrencies I'm holding, I realized that Steam was the only one that I was holding. Oh, and sorry, I didn't explain how it works. Steam gives you access to the Steemit platform, which is kind of a media presence, and it also gives you access to DTube, which is kind of a YouTube replacement. Whether or not they'll be that successful in replacing it, we'll see. But it's an interesting idea that when you create media and you interact with other people's media, Steemit creates Steam out of nowhere and pays it to you, and then you could turn around and spend that back out of existence to get your media up in the ranks to get yourself more exposure. So in a similar fashion, what we were talking about with the taxation, where there's this loop that brings it back to the issuer, the actual service that Steam provides is media presence. And out of all the cryptocurrencies I was holding, I realized that Steam was the only one I was holding for reasons other than pure speculation. And that's when it really clicked to me, where okay, what would a private currency need to look like? And I don't think the creators of Steam It understood this. I think they stumbled upon this by accident. Um, but going back to what you were saying about uh, a ledger that records documents, I'm sure many people who are listening to this have heard about people suggesting. I don't know if work has actually started on something like this. Um, Using blockchains to record chains of title, whether that's real estate or cars or whatever else has a title, airplanes. Um, because I mean, if you've ever done any real estate, title's a fucking mess. It is it is so chaotic. No one ever knows what's going to come out of the woodwork, and that's why they have title insurance. Because even an insurance company has to come in and say, okay, we've researched everything that we researched, and we said that this is the person who owns it. However, you never fucking know, so we will insure the fact that if it turns out that somebody else actually owns this, we'll pay for it and fix it. Um, how much of that could be alleviated simply by having, what you were describing, Nima, this unalterable document where we could point and say, okay, here is all the relevant documents to this chain. It's all right here. It can't be changed. It can't be, or at least it's difficult to fraud. Could you see Bitcoin moving in that direction? What about stability, though? Because, I mean, I don't know how many memes you've seen of Bitcoin flying around on a roller coaster. Um, it cracks me up every time I see one. But obviously, these cryptocurrencies are yeah, it goes in all directions. Um, Obviously, cryptocurrencies are very volatile right now. What do you think would need to be done? Oh yeah, definitely. I'm not saying Steam is got its shit figured out at all. I'm just saying Steam was the one that really stood out to me, where I was like, oh, I understand where where this closed loop is occurring. Um, the conversation where I wanted to move the conversation is, what would a cryptocurrency, or I guess any private currency, it technically doesn't have to be crypto. I think it would. I I think crypto demands it, otherwise it'd be too easy to counterfeit. But what would a cryptocurrency need to do to approach some level of stability that we see in stable government currencies today? So it's your answer is it's something more that, 10 years ago there may have been 20 guys using Bitcoin, and then a year later there's 20,000. That inherently is volatile, where, maybe each year we're multiplying the number by 10. Maybe, I mean, that maybe that's a little too rough on the exponential side. But the point still stands as. Go ahead. Right. So, because. Go ahead. 50 billion. Yeah. Yeah, it's 5% of 10% of the market cap. Yeah. Interesting point. I think it's worth bringing up what you said a second ago as well. The Just the people being used to it. Um, we've had government money, arguably, for the last 5,000 years. Our granddaddies, 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 granddaddies never remember a time when it didn't exist. Cryptocurrencies, yes, yes. At least in terms of written records, we have 5,000. But it goes back and back and back, and we're also ingrained with it that we have to have podcasts kind of trying to break down. Okay, what exactly is money? It's like the air that we breathe that we never paid attention to. Well, but when it comes to cryptocurrencies, it's like these are 10 years old. No one knows what the hell they are. There's no history to go back and point and say, okay, well they did this, back when Napoleon invaded Prussia, so that we could extrapolate. Not, we got none of that. Um, so it is a very interesting point when you say, okay, as more and more people start to adopt this, it by definition can't have the legitimacy yet because not enough of the world is participating. Um, Another side I like to look at this from is that traditionally government, pre-welfare state, took care of very basic functions, stuff like court systems, police, military, um, keeping track of private property, chain on title, stuff like that. And when I don't think we mentioned this in our previous conversations that much, is that, taxation gives value to government money, but also the fact that you have to pay your fines and fees in government money. If you sue somebody or you get a civil fine, you have to pay that fine in the unit of account. And so and that's another way that the money gains some value. And I mean, even when it comes to like property taxes, the property taxes are accounted in a unit of account, the U.S. dollar, if you're in the United States. But your property is valued in the U.S. dollar to begin with to figure out what those taxes are. So everything has very deep into like the bones of the governmental structure. This unit of account has been designed to measure things. So if a private institution were to start attempting to replace these functions of government. We already talked about chain of title. What about arbitration? Um, what about private security forces? I'm not really sure how to talk about private military forces, so I guess I'll leave that one out of the conversation for now. But if it starts going in this direction where the traditional things that the government did and what it used its money for, or gave its money value with, if private currency started doing that, and in fact, add insurance on top of this, where it's you if you want to use our insurance company, you must pay your premiums in the currency that we issued. Would you see these as stabilizing factors as well, Nima? To currency value. Explore that again. So you switched the cause and effect on me there. That the stability might be a symptom of the fact that it's already so universally utilized. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that because in all this blah 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 private currency Bitcoin stuff that we've been talking about, there's still this looming issue, which is you can trade in private currencies all day you want, but you still got to pay your taxes in dollars. So you mentioned lowering the taxes as a way of a transition, and we were talking about this before the recorded call, but why would the lowering of taxes allow the transition? Right. Well, yeah, the problem solved. Because I think we talked about this before, which is, what's the minimum effective dose of taxes required to continue giving currency value? And you and I both agree that it is way lower than we're being taxed right now. We could probably chop off, 95, 97, 98% of it and still be able to give value to the money. Are are you suggesting once we hit that minimum effective dose that a transition might be achieved if we start going a little bit beyond that minimum effective dose and getting smaller and smaller, that I guess so. I haven't thought about it this way before, but look, but let's just stay at the minimum effective dose. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that the federal government might not want to commit suicide voluntarily. I guess suicide by definition is voluntary, but so but let's say we had a educated enough population about MMT that says, federal government, we figured it out. We figured out that this whole debt ceiling budget nonsense is a bunch of nonsense that you're using to control our emotions and sway our opinions by. We want you to drop the taxes as much as possible without causing economic problems. And let's say that's, boom, 95% of it, and there's this 5% baseline, which gives the taxes value. Thank you. Gives the money value. At that minute, you're right. and legitimately so. Ick. Taxes not add value. If we have that minimum effective dose and we just stayed there. Now, I think at that minimum effective dose, let's say, because, between self-employment tax or slash FICA taxes and income tax, generally speaking, that's half of your money right there. Gone. 50%. Boom. That's before we get into property taxes and sales taxes and any other sort of miscellaneous taxes coming out of the woodwork. 50% right there out of your income. If that were to vanish overnight, which you and I think it could, and there would still be other taxes, would that by itself give the opportunity for these other currencies to come in, because the demand for dollars would not be as extreme? I was hoping for a more complicated answer. Right, because when we come back to the libertarian slash anarchic roots, at the end of the day, we understand that taxes are just a form of theft, and it's a form of violence or coercion, depending on how long you haven't paid them. And there's no way to make a fully functioning society if the very essence of the way that we communicate with each other is by, okay, the only way I can make your communication valuable is if I threaten you to hit you both. How could that possibly make any sense? So if, again, as a transition, because we spoke with some other guys on the Think Liberty Network before, Vinnie Marshall referred to what he likes to call the Rothbard button, which is turn off all government now, big red Rothbard button. And all of us on the show agreed that we would not want to push that button because the ensuing chaos would not, I believe, and I believe you believe, result in any sort of... Yes, correct. So if we wanted a more Rothbardian government, and that being there's no legal means of coercing or using violence against somebody, I guess an approach, and this is kind of a theory we're working out here right on the show, is if we continue to drop the taxes because they're not needed for spending to the point where they are not so drastically in demand, simply to keep us out of jail and keep the government from taking our property, that would allow what we've been discussing about the cryptocurrencies to come and offer a real alternative to government currency. I think that's a pretty interesting damn idea. What do you think, Nima? I had a comment on my YouTube channel because I upload this to my YouTube channel as well. Now that we've we've opened the doors, we've given an argument for how a private / cryptocurrency could be a contender with government currency, in the sense of the taxes are no longer the looming problem. I had an interesting question, which went something like this: that if we've got multiple institutions creating currency and funding whatever they're funding, irrespective of geography, meaning there's no real borders. There's no legal border saying, okay, you make that money over here and we'll make this money over here. The question was, what about wartime? If you've got these currency guys funding, or these currency institutions funding the blue team, and those other currency institutions funding the red team to kill each other, but there's no geographical separation between the two. How would that sort of chaos be prevented in Afghanistan when we have all these multiple competing currencies? Would freak out. Well, and I think specifically this guy's concern was that I feel it's a little silly the way he phrased it, but let's go along with it. I agree. And I would go as far as to say is, if you did end up in a situation where somebody did amass the enough of an army to go start attacking people, and a resistance was generated in response, you immediately would have borders. And I think and at that point, whatever issuer is on which side of the border is going to be captured by whatever army needs it in order to win the war. So because the guy's concern, I guess, was specifically if you've got most of the cryptocurrency supporting one side, but only one supports the other side, and by support, I guess they're spending money into existence to create war materials to fight. But what if you had a centralized one? What, going back to, if we have a institution like I mentioned, that the institution generates it for its services, let's say a DRO. Yeah, I agree. But I wanted to bring the comment up because I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, because that's always the one of the first, and I think a very legitimate concern is, if okay, we're in Afghanistan and no one has the ability to generate an army. Well, what happens if somebody generates an army, despite the fact that no one was supposed to have the ability? How do you muster a defense? And I think I I think the answer is, like you said, is if things are decentralized in such a way, um, there shouldn't have been any ability for anybody to do that. Yeah, makes me think of Carol Quigley, which will be a good other show to talk about. His yeah, and specifically the one I was thinking of was his Evolution of Civilizations, um, where he discusses the what he considers to be the prime economic factor which drives civilizations. How a what he calls an instrument eventually becomes an institution, and he specifically brought up armies, where a an army whose original purpose is to defend a people, um, may do that at the beginning, and then the war comes over is over, and they come home, and then they need something to do, and the army whose original purpose was to defend people, suddenly the purpose is now paying and feeding soldiers and doing drills and getting pensions and all this other stuff, and then by the time yeah, and by the time they actually do get attacked, the army can't really do what it was originally intended to do anymore because it's been completely morphed into this other thing. So yeah, and I mean, as you said, what we see as defense now is, I think, more of what I just described right there. Probably everywhere in the world. Anyway, so I think that was a unique spin for the internet on cryptocurrencies and MMT's view and our particular view. I think this is worth pointing out. Um, Most MMTers think cryptocurrencies are a bunch of shit. Um, they say you have to have taxes in order to have money. Cryptocurrencies don't tax. They can't be money. Forget it. There's no such thing as private currencies. Most MMTers are saying that. So we're kind of unique beasts where, again, I got to give credit where credit's due. Nima was the one who pointed this out. I'm just repeating it. But I think it's a good idea that we could use MMT to understand how a currency could be formed privately, and particularly, Nima, we did not insult the barter theory of money yet this show. What are we doing? Because most people look at a Bitcoin and they try to give it value via the barter theory of money, the regression theorem, which reminder to everybody, theorem is only the word theorem is only supposed to be used in the realm of mathematics. Even if you get into physics, you start using the word theory. The theory of gravity, the theory of relativity. It's not theorem. Uh, there's some serious audacity for the author of that name. But if we come at money and say, okay, the barter theory does not explain the value of money, what does? And we turn around and say, oh man, oh my god, it's the state theory that explains the value of money. Well, how do we get to private currency from here if the state created money? Well, instead of just throwing the whole thing away and saying, okay, I guess we need the state in order to have civilization, and backed by money, because we can use money. We can extract the principles, and the principles we are able to extract is money has an issuer that also happens to be the end demander slash destroyer of that money, which creates, I guess, literally a current, like an electrical current, for a currency to have value. So with that, go ahead. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, leave us comments. I like them. And don't be a dick about it.